Assalamu alaikum to all of our Halal Talks listeners. This is your host, Arham, and you are listening to episode 6 of our second podcast with Hina and Zeeshan Mukhtar. Hina Mukhtar is a writer for Seekers Hub. Zeeshan Mukhtar has been working in the energy industry for over 20 years, and he is also a financial counselor at MCC East Bay Community. I think this conversation was extremely dynamic. We learned a lot. And overall, it was just a beautiful experience being able to sit with these two people and learn from such exemplars in our community. So let's dive right into it.
You are now listening to Halal Talks.
So back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when you were growing up, what was the scene like?
Take it.
Oh, I'll take it because I'm older. I go back farther. So, our parents, mine and Hina's parents, are similar experiences that they came over as professional engineers with jobs when they came over. So it was, they had some financial security and a way to make it. And we were kids that were sort of very quickly middle class. But I think the attitude for the folks that were coming over and just seeing it with my parents and their friends is that, we wanna make it here financially, and we want to get along, and we want to kind of coexist with everybody. And Islam wasn't on the forefront the way it is now.
Yeah.
So people were like, "Oh, you're from this country. You're from India. You're from Pakistan." So it was very, very kind of cooperative, but people didn't make their differences out to be. The differences didn't stand out. And so you had I give an example of my father. His name was Humayun, but people couldn't remember his name, so he said, "Oh, just call me Hugh." Now, he wasn't doing that to deny his culture,
Right.
but he was doing that to sort of make it easy on the folks, his new neighbors, his new colleagues. So there was this idea let's
Fit in.
fit in, and let's do what our basic minimum requirements are, which is we need a Jummah, we need a place to pray on Fridays. So there was this thing we've got to get to this certain point, this certain hurdle point. And so I think the first generation that came over, they took those risks. They took those financial risks. I can remember people who couldn't buy another car, but they were putting money into buying a masjid. I mean, that's something that really, really highly respect for us to be able to do that, because they laid that groundstone, that foundation stone for us. But then I was raised here, so one of the things that I remember was that I'm going out and being influenced by public school and my friends, but my parents still think I'm their kid. And so in the house, you're Pakistani, but outside you're kind of changing. You're melding into this thing. You're kind of a American-born kid, and so your parents don't really know your experiences because they never experienced that. They just assume that you're the same as them. So that was kind of growing up, what I felt. Hina grew up in a bigger community, I think, so she has different thoughts.
Well, just a quick question for you too. When you're saying when you were at school, you were probably like the only Muslim there too, right? Or were there other Muslims?
Yeah, there was no other Muslims there. We were in New York, so there was a segment of New York that was coming in that were people who were coming in as cooks. They were coming in as cabbies. They were coming in. We were sort of the professional. We lived in a neighborhood where there was no Muslims. So I remember. I just pretended I was Puerto Rican. So everybody would be like, "Oh, Azmat," and my real name is Azmat. So people were like, "Azmat," I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Puerto Rican," So I didn't, it wasn't like people would go, "Oh my God, that's self-hate." That's not self-hate from a 7-year-old. That's just it's not complicated. It's not that complicated, Right. Yeah, all my friends were Puerto Rican. I had a friend named Darko who was Puerto Rican. So it was like, "Oh, Azmat and Darko," we were buddies, we were Puerto Ricans. And that's just kind of the neighborhood I lived. It was like either you were African-American, white, or you were brown, and most brown people were Puerto Rican. So it was simple.
So did you have to reconcile the two, where your school, who you were at school, and then the Muslim that you were at home? Did you have to kind of carve out that identity over time?
I think you did, because my parents didn't understand that there was this middle gray area. So there was Pakistani and there was American. That's how they saw the world. And so we knew that the rule was to be Pakistani in the home. So I think we presented that very Pakistani face, me and my sister. We spoke Urdu. We came over here when we were 3 or 4 years old. So we did speak Urdu. English was our second language. So there was definitely that consciousness, like knowing, like once I'm in the door, I'm Pakistani, and this is how I have to act in front of my parents. It wasn't because I was being deceitful, but you just knew that my parents didn't understand that gray area.
Right.
In raising my children, I know there's a huge gray area. There's no more black and white because they're second generation, and I understand what they're going through to a certain extent. So we bring that different kind of parenting into the house, so we can see it based on my experience.
My background was similar to Zeeshan's. I was born in New York, and then we moved out to California. They were in New York, and then they moved out to Northern California. I was in Southern California, and then we moved to Saudi Arabia. They moved to Saudi Arabia. We were in different cities. So I grew up in an American community in Saudi Arabia. So it was still very similar to the experience of growing up here, because it was an American school with American kids, American teachers. And same as Zeeshan, it was more cultural than religious. Like, I didn't really grow up with a complete understanding of what it meant to be Muslim. And then coming out to Southern California, really, it was our friends who saved us. Like, we had this really good, tight, strong Muslim community. And so I was one person in high school, and then on the weekends I got to be who I really was, you know. So it's exactly like what Zeeshan's saying, like we had two different identities. And that was really important to us with our own kids, that we didn't want them to have to live that kind of life where they were one person at school and another person at home. But back to your question about what it was like growing up as a Muslim in the 80s, I think Zeeshan and I were talking about this, about just how grateful we are to our parents' generation for what they did try to do with what they had at the time. The fact that they did establish the masajid that are there now. Yeah. And the fact that they did establish the Sunday schools. And, it's easy to make fun and poo-poo, like, oh, things were really basic back then, or all the teachers had accents that we didn't understand or we couldn't relate to them. But the fact was that they were trying to teach us the best they knew how, and they didn't lose too many of us, I don't know many people of my generation who are not practicing. Everybody has like a certain level of faith, mashallah.
Yeah, maybe that black and white world that they had forced us to really, really concentrate on that Pakistani culture, which may have ended up saving us, keeping us from the ills. But the other part of the story that you didn't get was that, we moved to Saudi Arabia, and then she moved to Saudi Arabia. We moved back to California, and she moved back to California. Hina was just stalking me since she was a little girl.
Auntie Hina, you brought up a really good point about how we should appreciate the immigrants who came here. Oftentimes you see people just making fun of them or saying that they didn't do a good job. But at the end of the day, the things that they did, what they've set for us, they're going to get the reward for that for generations.
Absolutely.
Like 3-4 generations down the line, when we've developed as a Muslim community even more, all the reward is going to be going back to the immigrants. Yeah. So now, when you had this rift between the two different identities, was there anything you were more inclined towards?
I mean, I think everybody always thought that being American, quote unquote, meant being white. And that was like the coolest thing to be, the best thing to be. Everyone wanted to celebrate Christmas. I mean, I think the confusion was to the point. It's funny because I grew up with a really strong Muslim community, whereas Zeeshan didn't. Yeah. And when I married him, he didn't have any Muslim friends, really, or any Muslim community. Yet I wanted to put a Christmas tree in the house the first year we got married. Like, I thought that was part of like how we were going to decorate our home, even though I didn't grow up with that. My parents didn't have a Christmas tree in the house, but I thought that was going to be what it meant to be an American couple. Like, and he was the one who was like, no, we do not need to be spending money on something that's not even part of our religion or tradition. And thank God we didn't. But that's how I think confused we were about what it meant what our identity was. Like, what did it mean to be an American? What did it mean to be a Muslim? And
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that story, because that's probably the first and last time I was the one who had that side of the coin of being like, no, we're not going to do the American thing. But I think that I mean, my experience was one of loneliness. I think when I first met Hina and her community in LA, I started going down. We were engaged. She was very blessed because she had a lot of people around her that were in the exact same boat that she was, which is you had Pakistani parents, you had American high school and college experience, and on the weekends it was this just, you know, really good melting pot of families coming together. It was a large community, and I got to know a lot of her friends really well, and they all were religious, they were all modest, they were all trying to conform in the right way. Whereas my experience was, and I was like, wow, you know, I wish I had this, because I was completely cut off. I mean, I came over here, my parents moved to Saudi Arabia, I went to Karachi American School, and I got a lot of that great friendship, people who were like me. I never grew up with people like me. And then I came back to the US and I got in touch.
You were only 16.
Yeah, I was only 16. Yeah, I was 16. I was really young, just going to college. And I was very lonely because I had this taste of that great friendship for 1 year. I was only in Pakistan for 1 year and doing high school, and everybody accepted me. I was kind of like the new cool kid, you know, actually.
You fit right in.
I fit right in. I would actually, you know, fit in better than I had even imagined, because I was like the new kid on the block who came from outside. A lot of them were Pakistani Americans, but they were always in Pakistan. So I was kind of the foreigner, right? So they accepted me. I had great friends there. And then all of a sudden it was just too short. It was like really, really short. And then the next thing I know, I'm on a plane and I'm back to loneliness. So I was very, very upset. And so what I did was I called, I knew some kids from Sunday school here, and I called some folks from my community before I went to college to come and get me, and to, you know, and I thought, well, I have some friends there, but their lives were so busy. They had spent 5-6 years while I was gone bonding, and I was one of those families that sort of dropped off the radar. So I didn't feel accepted by them. And it's no fault of their own. They just, you know, I wasn't part of their community. And so what happened in my mind, and one of the things that happens in the psychology of young people, is you just make this snap connection. Like, okay, I'm done. Because you have to have walls psychologically to protect yourself. So when that happened to me, I was like, I'm an island. You know, there's nobody I need to depend on. I'm born alone. I'm going to die alone. You know, that kind of thing. It's very black and white. But then I went to college and I was like, that opened the door for me to accept people in college as my friends and my family that were not my culture. They're coming all from different places in life. And those were my closest, dearest friends. And so obviously I'm going to change, because I'm not part of the Muslim community. I'm not part of that, you know, that people who are like me. So I'm going to change and morph into something that is basically my sohbah, my companionship. And to this day, I love them to death, because that part of my life, they filled that hole at that time. But it also led me to do things that, you know, I didn't live life as a Muslim. So, you know, so the cautionary tale here, I think that the answer to the question is that, you know, community is very, very important. As much as we think we're alone and we think we can handle it alone, we're social beings. And we're going to get influence, and we're going to have hearts that incline towards the people that you're with, and you're going to be as much like them as much as time as you spend.